never forget that night, January 15th, 2019. I was 2 years into my job as a police officer in a small, Midwestern town. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, and the biggest crimes are petty theft or drunk and disorderly conduct. It was a quiet, snowy evening, and the town had settled into the muffled silence of winter. My shift was almost over. Just one more patrol around the outskirts of town before I could go home to my wife and newborn son. The roads were slick, my cruiser's headlights cutting through the swirling snowflakes as I turned on to County Road 7. This road was notorious for accidents and the occasional abandoned vehicle. But tonight, something else caught my attention. About 200 feet ahead, just past the edge of my high beams, was a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or some stray animal, but as I got closer, I saw it was a man. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing away from me. No coat, no hat, just a tattered hoodie and jeans. His posture was rigid, his head tilted slightly to the side like he was listening to something. I slowed the cruiser down and rolled down my window. "Hey, you okay?" No response. I parked, leaving my headlights trained on him, and stepped out into the freezing night air. The snow crunched under my boots as I approached, hand resting on my flashlight holster. The closer I got, the more unsettled I became. His clothes were soaked through, his hands hanging limply at his sides, fingers almost black with frostbite. "Sir, I need you to turn around." He didn't move. I radioed dispatch. "This is Officer Keller. I've got a possible 1096 on County Road 7. Male, unresponsive. Sending location now." As I waited for a response, the man finally moved. Just slightly. His shoulders twitched, almost like he was shivering, but it was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Then he let out a low, guttural sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I drew my flashlight, shining it on his face. It was a huge mistake. His head snapped around so fast it was almost a blur. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and staring straight through me. His mouth was open, unnaturally wide, and his lips were cracked and bleeding. But what froze me wasn't his face. It was his neck. It looked broken, his head lolling at an angle no human anatomy could support. "Stay where you are," I shouted, drawing my gun. But he didn't listen. He took a step forward, then another, his movements jerky and unnatural. I backpedaled toward my cruiser, yelling into my radio for backup. Before I could get inside, he broke into a full-on sprint towards me. It wasn't human. He covered the distance between us in seconds, his feet barely making a sound on the snow. I fired a shot, a warning, but he didn't stop. His mouth twisted into an unnatural grin as he lunged at me. I threw myself into the cruiser, slamming the door shut as his hands hit the glass. He pounded on my window, his face pressed against it, his eyes wide with rage. The glass started to crack. I floored the gas. The cruiser fishtailed on the icy road, but I didn't care. I sped back toward town, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road again, his head tilted, watching me drive away. When I reached the station, I told my sergeant what happened. He sent out a team to investigate, but they found nothing. No footprints, no broken glass, no sign of anyone. I took a week off after that. I told my wife I was sick, but the truth is, I couldn't bring myself to drive at night anymore. I still see him sometimes, in my dreams, or worse, when I'm alone on a quiet road. say this town has its secrets. Maybe that man was one of them. But whatever he was, I pray I never meet him again. I was working the night shift in the summer of 2016. The air was thick, heavy, with the kind of humidity that clings to your skin. I was stationed in a small coastal town in South Carolina, the kind of place where the sound of cicadas filled the night and old houses sat under the shadows of sprawling oak trees. That night, the radio had been mostly quiet, just the usual traffic stops and noise complaints. At around 1:30 a.m., dispatch called in with something unusual. A 911 hang-up from an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. No one lived there anymore, not since the Myers family disappeared 2 years ago. It was one of those local tragedies that everyone whispered about, but no one liked to talk about. The house had sat vacant ever since. "Unit 4, that's your area," dispatch said. I sighed and keyed the mic. "Copy that, en route." The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, even though I knew it had only been a couple of years. The porch sagged, the paint peeled, and the windows were black voids staring back at me. I parked in the gravel driveway, radioed my location, and stepped out of the car. The air felt colder here, unnatural for a summer night. I could hear the wind rustling through the tall grass, but it was eerily quiet otherwise. No insects, no distant traffic, nothing. I approached the front door, my flashlight slicing through the dark. The door was ajar, creaking as it swayed slightly in the breeze. "Police!" I called out, stepping inside. The house smelled stale, like old mold and decay. My boots echoed on the wooden floors as I moved through the entryway. Furniture was still scattered around, covered in sheets, like the family had just stepped out and never came back. "Hello?" I called out again, shining my light in the living room. Nothing. Then I heard it. A faint thud, like something heavy had hit the floor upstairs. "Police! If someone's here, come out now." No response. I drew my weapon and made my way to the staircase. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound magnified in the stillness. As I reached the top, I could feel the sweat on my back despite the chill in the air. The hallway was lined with doors, each one slightly open, like someone had been checking the rooms. I cleared the first two, a bathroom and a small bedroom with a broken bed frame. When I got to the third door, I stopped. It was open wider than the others, and I could see the faint outline of a rocking chair in the corner. The chair was moving, swaying slowly, back and forth. I stepped inside, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The room was empty except for the chair, which creaked as it rocked. I scanned every corner, every shadow, but there was no one there. Then the chair stopped. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I turned around to leave, but as I did, I heard a voice. A whisper right behind me. "Help us." I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. Nothing. Then the door slammed shut. I rushed to the door, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering started again, louder this time, coming from all around me. Voices, men, women, children, all overlapping, pleading, crying out for help. "Help us. Why didn't you come? You let it take us." I slammed my shoulder against the door, desperate to get out. The whispers turned into screams, deafening, filling my head like a violent storm. Finally, the door flew open, and I I stumbled out into the hallway. I didn't stop to think. I ran, barreling down the stairs and out into the night. When I got back to my cruiser, I radioed dispatch, my voice shaking. "The house is clear. No one's here." I didn't tell him what I saw, though. I didn't tell anyone. The next morning, I went back, not as an officer, but out of curiosity. The house was empty, just as I'd left it. But on the rocking chair in that upstairs room, there was something I hadn't seen the night before. A photograph. It was the Myers family. The father, mother, and two little girls smiled brightly at the camera. But someone or something had scratched out their eyes in the picture. I don't patrol near that farmhouse anymore. Some calls just aren't worth answering. It was a quiet Tuesday night in late October, the kind where the only sound on the radio is static or the occasional dispatch for a broken taillight. I was patrolling the county roads near the state line, the ones that cut through endless stretches of farmland and forest. The fog had rolled in thick, swallowing the beams of my headlights and giving everything an eerie, ghostly glow. Around 3 a.m., my radar gun caught a car doing 85 in a 55. I hit the lights and sirens, expecting the driver to pull over immediately, but they didn't. Instead, the car, a black, beat-up sedan, sped up. Unit 12? Unit 12, I have a vehicle failing to yield on Route 19. I radioed in. Dispatch acknowledged, and I pushed the pedal down, chasing the taillights ahead. The sedan weaved recklessly, almost losing control as it barreled down the winding road. I followed, trying to get a better look at the driver, but the windows were tinted too dark. Something about the way the car moved felt off. Jerky and erratic, like the driver didn't know how to handle the vehicle. The chase lasted about 6 minutes, though it felt much longer. The sedan suddenly veered off the main road onto a narrow dirt path leading into the woods. The trees loomed over us like a tunnel, and the fog only got thicker. My tires kicked up mud and gravel as I pursued, every nerve in my body on edge. Finally, the car came to a sudden stop in a small clearing. The headlights cut out, plunging everything into darkness except for my own lights. I parked a safe distance away, drew my weapon, and stepped out, my breath visible in the cold air. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands up, now!" I shouted. No response. I repeated the command, edging closer, my flashlight trained on the driver's side door. The car was still running, but the windows were so dark I couldn't see inside. Then, slowly, the driver's door creaked open. A man stepped out, his movements stiff and unnatural. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with a gaunt face and wild eyes that darted around like a trapped animal. His clothes were dirty, his hands trembling as he raised them above his head. "Stay where you are," I commanded. "I didn't mean to..." "What?" "I didn't mean to bring her." "Bring who?" Before he could answer, something slammed against the backseat window from inside the car. The sound was loud, violent, a deep thud that made me flinch. The man froze, his eyes wide with terror. "Get her out! Get her out here now!" I swung my flashlight to the backseat window. The glass was fogged up from the inside, but there was movement, shadows shifting, pressing against the glass. I ordered the man to get on the ground, but he dropped to his knees on his own, covering his face with his hands, rocking back and forth. "Don't let her out." I moved toward the car, my flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. Who's in there? Come out with your hands up. I reached for the rear door handle, and the moment my hand touched the metal, the movement inside completely stopped. The back seat was empty. No bags, no people, nothing. Just the faint smell of something metallic, like blood. I turned back to the man on the ground who was sobbing now uncontrollably. There's no one in the car. You don't see her? She's right there. She's always there. My radio crackled to life, startling me. Unit 12, status check. Do you need assistance? I grabbed my mic. Suspect in custody. No passengers. I secured the man in handcuffs and called for a tow truck to impound the vehicle. But as I waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no wind, just the faint hum of my police cruiser's engine. As the tow truck arrived and I prepared to leave, I glanced in my rearview mirror. There in the backseat of my cruiser was a face, pale, sunken, with hollow black eyes staring directly at me. I spun around, gun drawn, but the back seat was empty. I looked at the man in the passenger seat. He was staring straight ahead, tears streaming down his face. She's with you now. I didn't sleep that night, and I never drove those roads alone ever again.